Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to see you again at Garden Hour, starting our second session of the season. And we'll be starting this morning or this afternoon with myself and Dr. Lang and Dr. Ball. And we'll start with Dr. Lang, our consumer horticulture specialist. And what are you going to be talking about tonight, Kristine?
So tonight I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks for propagating houseplants and showing some photos of my recent activities and tucking a few other things in there as well, but a lot about propagation.
All right. And tonight I'm going to be talking about sort of a grab bag of things, everything from new varieties to consider to some reminders about when to plant and when to prune. And John, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Sure, John Ball, the tree guy, and Kristine, I'm hoping we're going to see some puppy or kitty pictures in there because those are both cuties. So, but I'm going to be talking about some of the plants that are actually beginning to flower. I think spring is here. And then I know it's hard to believe, and I even hate to say the word, but drought. We're seeing a lot of drought damage on our woody plants. And then a little bit update on some of the insects that are taking advantage of those drought conditions. So I'll kind of finish up in a depressing note. Hence, we need those cute puppy and kitty pictures early.
I will start us out here with sharing my screen. Oops, that didn't work. Let's try that again. Takes a while to get back into the groove. All right, there we go. And does that look right?
Looks great.
Okay, good. It's doing weird things on my screen tonight, so that's the way it is. Okay, there we are. Now, so I'll start off with the weather information again, just to remind you of looking at soil temperatures and being patient while those heat up. In the northern half of the state, of course, we don't want to be planting any of the warm season crops quite yet based on soil temperatures alone. We're getting pretty close in some of the southeast, but I'd still hold off on planting those frost tender crops until the temperatures stay well above 60. Super sweet corn, seedless watermelon, and beans all can be damaged by cooler temperatures than 60. So as this goes up and down with rain and cooler temperatures. And if we look at the 24-hour low temperature, then we're into the 40s across the state. It looks like it's kind of hanging in there, and we may be done with frost yet, but keep your fingers crossed. And those of you in the northern part of the state probably want to keep your blankets around just in case. But we're getting a lot closer. Tonight I wanted to talk about sweet corn, and since I just told you it may be a little early yet to plant that, you may be wondering why tonight, but I wanted to bring it up because you may be going to the store and buying your selections of sweet corn seed if you have not already. And so I want to talk a little bit about isolation requirements for sweet corn, and I'm going to be going through some of the various kinds of sweet corn, and there are several different types, and some of them you can plant together and some you cannot. Now, you've probably heard that you shouldn't plant sweet corn near field corn if they're going to be forming silks at the same time, or sending pollen around at the same time. If they're different pollination dates, you're okay, but you'll have to figure that one out. So we isolate sweet corn, or SU is the designation for those. And these are the ones that we grew up with, things like Jubilee and Silver Queen's been around a long time. They may be heirloom varieties, but they're sort of the tried and true. And then breeders started working on sweet corn to increase the amount of sugar and to take this gene that turns starch or sugar to starch. Remember, you had to bring your sweet corn into the house and put it in the pot right away, or it would start losing sugar. Well, they found a gene that occurred naturally and bred that into the sweet corn, so that now our sweet corn stays sweet even if it sits on the counter a couple of days. So one type of that variety is called SE, or for sugary enhanced. And when this first came out, you had to isolate it. Now you do not have to isolate it from the regular type of sweet corn. So, and these varieties had very tender kernels, very sweet. Sometimes we're getting up to like 25, 30, 35% sugar in sweet corn. You could almost consider it candy rather than a vegetable. But the names reflect that, things like candy corn, sugar buns. And then a little bit newer variety was a cross between sugar enhanced and SH2, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this one has to be isolated from everything else. If you're going to plant one of these varieties, you need to isolate it from any of the other kinds of sweet corn. So sugar enhanced or sugary. You can put it with another synergistic, but it needs to be isolated. Again, you can do that by distance, or you can do it by planting time. And then we have the SH2, which was one of the first actually to be bred for that extra sweetness. And you have names like extra tender, extra sweet. A new one that's come out recently is called On Deck, and that can actually be planted in a raised bed or in a container. So I haven't tried that one, but it'd be one to look for if you're restricted in space. These two have to be isolated from everything else. So if you're planting SH2s, you don't want to have SEs or SYNs next to them. So again, that isolation. And then finally popcorn, which isn't a sweet corn, obviously, but popcorn also has to be isolated from all these other varieties. So just keep that in mind when you're planning your plantings. Now, another one that you don't want to be planting yet is your pumpkins. But again, I wanted to talk about the varieties, because if you're out and looking at some different varieties, you might want to think about, do you want to eat these pumpkins, or do you just want them for jack-o'-lanterns or other kinds of ornamental purposes? And you can't tell just by looking at a pumpkin whether or not it's an edible variety, although the edible varieties tend to be lower weight, maybe 4, 6, 8 pounds. Even 8 pounds might be large for sort of the traditional shape. So they tend to be smaller. And the other thing, if you pick up one of these varieties and it's heavy, that indicates it has more water and less dry matter. And you want dry matter if you're going to cook it. So that's kind of another hint, but unless you know the variety, it's pretty hard to tell. Now, these varieties here, this is Baby Bear up in the upper left, and it's only 1 or 2 pounds, you know, those cute little pumpkins. Interestingly enough, those are edible. Not all the miniature pumpkins are edible, but this particular one is. So it'd be kind of fun, I think, to cook these tiny little pumpkins. The next one here is a cinnamon, which has an interesting flavor to it. Again, it's pretty small, 4 or 5 pounds, and the traditional New England pie. And then some of these other types of pumpkins, which you're starting to see more of in the market. Some of these are European. The French seem to have a lot of pumpkins that they grow for food and other purposes. And these, it seems like more the squatty pumpkins, like this sort of greenish one and the white one. That often indicates that they're probably edible because they were selected more for eating than for appearance. But again, you just have to double check. And then we have one up in the upper right hand corner, and this almost looks like, you might look at it and say, well, that's got to be a gourd, that's not going to be edible. But in this case, it's a French name, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. But it is apparently quite good eating, despite its appearance. So bottom line is, double check if you want to eat it. Make sure you've got an edible variety to start with. And then I wanted to mention Triumph Apple, because I've never talked about it before. I don't know if you have, John. This is a Minnesota release. It's a cross of Honeycrisp and Liberty. And it's just came out a couple years ago, so it's still building up in the nursery industry. So it's not real available yet. Oddly enough, Gurney's often gets the first release for some of these varieties for consumers. And Gurney's is the one. Gurney's and Gardens Alive are connected, and they're both the ones that are carrying it this year for consumers. But it's a cross of Honeycrisp and Liberty, which are both recommended varieties on our list. And it's said to be very scab resistant. It's zone 4 hardiness, good for fresh eating, and like Honeycrisp, it can store up to 6 months. It's tart sweet, not quite as juicy crisp as Honeycrisp, but it's still pretty good eating, and it ripens in late September. So that's another one to add, particularly for you in the east side of the state, where you're trying to plant something that you may not have to spray all the time for scab. So that's a possibility there. And then finally, I wanted to remind people it's not too late to prune grapevines. In fact, they're about like oak trees. And once the oak trees are starting to open buds, your grapevines probably are too. And they may bleed some when you cut through them. That's okay, don't worry about it. Usually what we're looking for, unless it's a real vigorous vine, we want to leave somewhere between 40 and 60 buds on the vine. And if you count each one of these buds here, we've probably got 60 on these four canes. That's all that remains. We'd leave a couple little spurs here for next year. Each one of these has 2 or 3 buds, and everything else gets taken off. That's one way to prune your grapevine. The other way that you often see in nurseries, whoops, and this is a drawing of how to do that as opposed to the actual vine. The other way that you often see in the vineyards is more of a permanent arms here with canes coming down off of, whoops, whoa, coming down off the main cordon. or those arms that go across. And again, you would just want to leave no more than 40 to 60 of buds, adding all these up together on both arms of this vine. And again, a picture of that. The reason we don't want to leave any more is that each one of those buds is going to produce a cane that will have anywhere from 8 to 15 leaves on it. So that's a lot of plant material, plus 2 or 3 clusters generally. So just a reminder to go out and see what's going on with your grapes. And with that, I'm going to, I see we have one question. Vole damage. Yes, we are going to be talking about vole damage, I believe, tonight. Isn't that right, John?
And
I'm going to add it as we're speaking.
awesome.
All right.
Well,
I'll turn it over to Kristine.
Well, tell you what, Rhoda, I'm now very hungry and I cannot wait to try one of those new apples. So I'm going to have to keep an eye out, or if you know of any ways that certain people can get a hold of them, I look forward to hearing more. So as I'm pulling things up, does everything look good from my side, Rhoda?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Well, I have a couple of updates from last week. I do want to share with folks. I know there was a question about straw bale gardening, so I'm going to be touching on that tonight as well. But I want to share with people that the plant count in my office is down from 35 to 34. I managed to kill my African violets. So just a friendly reminder not to be in a rush when watering your picky houseplants. And perhaps don't douse your African violet in really cold water, because that results in all of the leaves rotting off very quickly within a matter of days. So Exhibit A right here, we've got 2 really sad leaves low. Nope, that one's gone too. So just a reminder, pay attention to your watering temperatures with African violets, and they like to run on the dry side. So we're going to be talking about houseplants tonight as well. So first, I do want to share with people, as you are like me and getting really excited to start planting things outdoors, because as you know, I've already direct seeded some things, and joke was on me, Rhoda. My pansies did get hit with the cold snap. I want to say that was Wednesday or Thursday last week. So I did see some yellowing and cold damage on my pansies that I had already planted out. But the radishes look awesome, and I swear you can watch them grow. So we're getting, in my family, in my household, I'm getting really excited to put out some herbs and some cut flowers, things like Lysianthus, calendula. Oh, I've got all sorts of good stuff in this photo. Herbs like oregano and thyme, rosemary, the parsley, the fennel. I'm just trying to remember what's all in these photos. But these were all plants that I started indoors from seed as transplants and lived a life of luxury in my bathroom under lights with some fans. And you need to consider giving your plants a transition phase as they move from that life of luxury, whether you're buying them at the garden center, you're moving them out of your basement, you're moving them out of, off your kitchen table because you finally want to reclaim it. Hardening off transplants is a helpful step to ensure proper root development and proper transplant response to being thrown, hopefully not physically thrown, but what feels to them like, oh, I was living this life of luxury with the lights and the perfect temperature and everything was great. And now you threw me outside and it's windy and the temperatures are fluctuating widely and there's more sunshine than the LED lights in your bathroom. So to help plants acclimate to that change, I do recommend, we do recommend hardening off those transplants. And, some people will put their plants on a wagon or a cart and they'll bring them out by day and bring them in by night. Pay attention to what low temperatures are going to look like. I felt really confident with these particular plants, setting them out and leaving them out at night, but I am keeping an eye on temperatures. But our lows aren't predicted for the next several days in Brookings to dip below 45. So I felt confident leaving these out overnight. They're in a spot that's fairly shaded under an eave. They're somewhat protected from the wind. because we want those plants to have an opportunity to acclimate to those outdoor conditions versus putting them in the middle of the bright sunny garden where there are 20+mile-per-hour winds, where they would, potentially dry out really quickly. You might see signs of browning or yellowing on the leaves that indicate sunburn, and that could be really, really problematic for your plants. And if you want to read more about hardening off transplants, we have a nice kind of step-by-step guide on the extension website. And I just want to share that the tomatoes and peppers and basil, those heat-loving plants, those are still in the bathroom. I'm going to start hardening those off later this week to prepare for a week out of planting if weather conditions look favorable. So again, pay attention to what the 10+ day outlook looks like for your area. We've shared with you before, but if you're still curious about the average frost-free date for your area, do check out the SDSU Mesonet, as that's a great spot to look on the map and see what the average frost-free date is for your area to play it safe for all of those awesome plants that you're buying and bringing home. All right, as promised, I'm going to talk about propagating. And as promised for John Ball, you will see both my dog and my cat in this presentation. So maybe I'll try to work them into every garden hour. I have a bit of a plant problem lately, both with purchasing and propagating plants that I already own. One of the local garden centers had little itty bitty houseplants for sale in tiny 1-inch pots. And so I may have purchased oodles of them and then potted them up into 4-inch pots so that the roots would have more room and they're spread all over the house. And then, folks, I discovered this wonderful thing called mail order succulents. So that's what got me this week. And as you can see on the right, it is now desperation in my family. I'm refusing to buy any more pots, and I'm starting to scavenge dishes, leftover jars. Nothing is safe as far as a container goes for houseplants. So my husband had to cut me off when I tried to steal his favorite pie dish. But again, potting up plants is part of the propagation process. It's part of plant health and plant care. If your houseplants are, spring is a great time as we're excited to garden, but maybe it's too cold to get outdoors. You're waiting for those soil temperatures to warm up. Consider taking a day to divide your houseplants. One of the first things I discovered about my mail order succulents is that several of them had, I'm just going to pick on the plant right here in the front. Some of you might know that as a panda plant, but that is a type of kalanchoe, and it has those nice, or kalanchoe, depending on how you like to pronounce it. But it has those nice fuzzy leaves. But there were 2 of those puppies in the pot that I got sent from the supplier. So I gently teased apart the roots and I filled 2 teacups. And I just want to note that, yes, these teacups lack drainage. But for my succulent plants, I used a succulent mix, which has more sand. It has more perlite, which is the white stuff you see in your potting mix. It had a little bit more kind of chipped bark, so it's going to be a lot more airy. It's going to drain a lot faster. And I'm going to water these very carefully, not very often. We're talking like every 2 to 3 weeks, so that I don't flood those, because the one limitation with putting succulents in teacups is it is a literal dish garden, but there is no drainage. So if you are a chronic overwaterer, do not do this. It would be a very bad idea, because chances are you're going to flood those plants. The lovely picture with my bored dog on the left waiting for me to pot up houseplants. All of those pots had drainage with the catchment pan at the bottom, which is what we're always going to recommend for houseplants, is have a way to water them thoroughly, let that excess water drain, dump it out of the pan, put it back on the shelf or wherever it is in your home, so that those plants aren't sitting too wet. More often than not, overloving, aka overwatering our houseplants, is a cause for decline. So bets are on with my husband for how long it's going to take before I overlove my succulents. So stay tuned. So besides purchasing plants and dividing them and going bonkers at the garden center or the mail order, how else can I propagate plants? Whether my friend has something that's really cool hanging out in their office or home, or my plants are crawling out of their pot and I need to give away some plants. So some really basic plant propagation tips. And I just want to call out, there's a nice publication from Nebraska Extension that has some great line drawings and photos that walk you through some of these things as well. And I want to share, because I know I have at least one guest listener from Iowa on tonight's call who was curious about how to pinch herbs, that propagating houseplants is not unlike pinching herbs or pinching some of our favorite plants. So pinching and cutting are both the acts of removing plant material. And if we move from left to right on this photo, this is an example of how to do a stem tip cutting, which I happen to show you Pilea, but you could do this with your favorite basil plant if you wanted to. But you typically want three, I'll say two sets of leaves minimum. 3 to 4 would be better. And you can see here there's 1, 2, 3 sets of leaves as we count from top to bottom. And then you're going to cut right below that set of leaves. And on your plant where you've removed the plant material, you would then cut a little bit closer to where the remaining set of leaves is, because that little bit of stem tissue that's left, that's just going to die back and rot off anyways. So I'll just call out, if you're looking on this photo right here, you would just want to pinch or cut down the next set of true leaves if you were pinching your herbs or taking cuttings from your house plants, so that you don't have a rotten nubby stub left over. And then what's really important to know is in this yellow circle here on the photo in the middle, you can see I've removed those 2 lower leaves. What remains is you can see the slight bump. That is what we call the node of the leaf. And that is the point where we're going to put that part below our potting media. And that's going to be the point where roots will initiate so that we can propagate our plant. Sometimes on something like a Pilea, or you've maybe noticed this on basil or tomatoes, we will sometimes see shoots or adventitious roots form on other points along that stem as well. And what you'll see here, so complete my propagation for my stem tip cutting of my Pilea, is I filled some I took some Dixie cups, I poked some holes in them. I happened to fill this Dixie cup with perlite, which, as a refresher for folks who don't spend a lot of time with potting media, that's a cracked volcanic glass. It's the white crunchy stuff in our potting media. And that's really great for aeration. It has a little bit of water holding capacity as well. But one of the things that happens when we're propagating plants, especially with herbaceous cuttings, is sometimes they sit too wet and those roots start to rot off. So having this perlite allows for, you're able to hold the stem. I usually use a pencil or something to poke a hole to kind of break that perlite apart, stick that cutting in that pot, and then gently press that perlite around it and water it in. So that's one simple method to take a cutting. Now, what about those long vining plants like our philodendrons, our pothos? I'm looking over my shoulder right now. I've got a monstera that is kind of taking over my desk. How can we propagate those? So you might notice that you could take some of those stems and put them in potting media, and they're going to start to form adventitious roots from the stem. And that's very similar to what they would do in a natural setting, and they would start to root into the tree, the bark, the soil, anything around them. And then if that got lopped off by a machete or an animal or a crazy person running by, that would ensure that there's another piece of that plant that's able to survive and perpetuate in nature. So with things like philodendron or our monsteras, we can do what's called a leaf bud cutting. I've circled here, you literally just take one little chunk of stem and you have that one leaf, and you're going to have new shoots that are actually going to initiate from what we call the leaf axil. And you can already see that that aerial root is starting to form, and that's going to reach down into the potting media, and that's going to form the basis of the new root system. And you'll see here on the photo on the right that I have pinned my leaf, or I've set my leaf bud cutting on top of, this time I used vermiculite, which would be another suggested product for propagating houseplants. Vermiculite is expanded mica, which is why it looks so bright and shiny. It feels like we're out in the Black Hills. That has a nice water holding capacity. Some aeration, you'd want to use a larger vermiculite so that there's a little bit more pore space. Again, we're trying to not, as these plants are forming roots, we're trying to not have any disease entry or rotting of tissue, which is a great reminder when you're making these cuttings. Use clean tools, use clean hands. You can either do that by spraying a little bit of rubbing alcohol on your cleaning surface. I know we probably have extra rubbing alcohol in a post-COVID world. spraying that on your tools and then letting it dry out. Or you can always dip your tools in a 10% bleach solution to disinfect as you're taking cuttings. One thing I have learned with these leaf bud cuttings is sometimes the leaf to stem ratio is a little wonky, and it does not hurt to pin that stem to your potting media. So you can see where I've got the arrows. This cutting would have benefited from just a little piece of wire. I've even just taken paper clips and unbent them and made a little U to pin that cutting to the propagation media. And this is a photo of, I took a bunch of cuttings in this case. So lots of Dixie cups, again, with holes, and I did some perlite, some vermiculite. I was just trying to see if I liked one better than the other. Honestly, they both did really well for me. And in my case, I had a greenhouse tray, what would be called a 1020 flat. And I had this nice tall plastic dome that I was able to put over the whole works. And I just had a spray bottle like you might use to wet your hair, or, a spray bottle similar to a, spray bottle for washing windows, something like that. But get a fresh, clean one. Don't use one that's had cleaning product or chemicals in it before. Label it as plant water if you want. And I just gently mist it under that dome over those cuttings and put the dome over the whole works. After I had put a little bit of water in each of these pots to kind of water things in and settle the potting media around it, I didn't water anymore because we don't have enough of a root system that it's not going to be, the plants aren't going to be drying up that water. And I just left that dome on there. If you're like, I don't have a fancy plastic humidity dome, you could fill a pot or some other vessel with vermiculite or perlite, and you can take a gallon plastic bag and roll it over the pot, so to form some sort of a dome. The goal is we want high humidity because those plants don't have enough of a root system to be taking up water and supporting photosynthetic activity. So we need to reduce water loss while that root system is forming. And this doesn't have to take very long. A lot of times with many of our herbaceous cuttings, especially things like my Pilea, or if you were to do this with mint or basil, if you loved propagating herbs, or even coleus, for example, you start to see roots in less than 2 weeks. So it's pretty hard to see in this photo, I realized after the fact, so I threw a yellow circle over it, but there are already roots forming when I pulled that Pilea cutting out of the potting mix. And once you start to see roots forming, that would be the time to fill, in this case, I wouldn't go much bigger than a 3 or a 4 inch pot, fill that with a soilless potting mix. So that's usually going to have some peat. It might have some wood chips. You're going to see some of that mica and that perlite, and, stick those cuttings, water it in. But remember that plant and that root system are still really tiny. So let that soil dry down in between. Don't overwater, or you might still see those young cuttings that you've propagated start to rot off. So these are some that propagate really quickly and really readily. I want to share a photo of some other plants, some other cuttings that I had taken. These were all collected in April 2022. And I snapped this picture last week because I was planning on sharing it with you last week. And I just want to call out in the middle in my coffee mug. Clearly, I have a dish gardening problem. But those are succulents that have been propagated by leaf cuttings. And leaf cuttings with many of our jade plants and our kalanchoes can be as simple. And again, you can tell I have a lot of plants sitting around me on my desk, but it can be simple as gently snapping the leaf of that plant. I'm hoping you can kind of see this on my camera, but gently snapping that leaf off and lay it on a soil surface on kind of a semi-sandy or a dry potting media. And honestly, you just let it sit there for a week or so, because what's happening is that wound site where you've snapped that leaf off from the stem, it is forming callus, it's sealing off. And once that has happened, you're not going to have any disease, you're going to prevent disease or any issues that way. And that's also signaling to that plant, again, similar to in nature, all right, one of my leaves has fallen off. And succulents are one that can initiate both roots and shoots from a single piece of leaf. Plants are amazing. So I'm going to be honest, those leaf cuttings in this dish garden, I just tried to forget them. And it's kind of like, watching watching paint dry, or if you watch the paint, it doesn't dry, watch pot doesn't boil. Watch leaf cuttings. I swear they do not get roots and shoots. And then you look at them 3 to 4 weeks later and you're like, by golly, it worked. And again, there's way more tips and tricks in the Nebraska Extension publication, as well as the University of Georgia publication. But my new thing is succulents, and my nephew Micah and I are kind of trading succulent stories, and we're both into mail order succulents, but we're going to have to swap a bunch of leaf cuttings too. All right, so as we round out talking about houseplants, one big consideration, so as promised, here's the photo of the cat. One big consideration is, what is your pet situation? I used to have a lot of houseplants, and then I adopted this lovely black cat when he was about a year old, and he destroyed a lot of houseplants in his teenage cat years. And he's about 9 years old and slowed down a little bit. So we're trying to reintroduce houseplants, but I'm still considering what are the tallest shelves, or what plants don't have grass-like leaves, because grass-like leaves apparently are still very tasty to the cat. So no, do be aware of that as you think about bringing houseplants into your home. Do you have a dog that loves digging? Our dog used to really love digging, so there were some issues with our young animals, but now that they're a little bit older and a little bit slower, we're trying some things. All of that to say, as you can see in the photo on the right, my grass-like Dracena looked very tasty to the cat. And so that has been rehomed in my office and is slowly but surely recovering from the pruning that my cat gave it. So if you have questions or concerns, whether it's indoor or outdoor plants of, is this toxic to my cat? Is this going to be an issue for my dog? I do recommend that you check out the Pet Poison Helpline. And that's a database that's been curated by veterinarians. One of my colleagues over in the animal science arena here on campus suggested that website, and you can search it by plant. And Dracena is one that, when consumed in large quantities, is going to cause vomiting for my cat, which I didn't need the database to tell me, but it was good to double check and decide to rehome it. So just a note on our furry friends. And as I'm wrapping up my time, so we have plenty of time for John Ball, I do want to touch on, last week someone asked, is straw bale gardening possible? How do you do it? What are the steps? There is some science around straw bale gardening. There are some nice step-by-step guides. I found a really nice one with photos from Clemson. The important thing to remember is, don't just take a straw bale, plunk it down in your yard, and throw some seeds in it and add some water. That is probably going to result in failure for you. So a key step to success in straw bale gardening is what is called the conditioning process. And you're going to want to allow 2 to 3 weeks for that before you plan to plant anything in it. And the goal with that is you want to initiate some decomposition. So think of it as you're trying to get the center of that bale to compost, essentially. So you're adding minerals, you add some calcium, you add a fair amount of nitrogen, and then you add water so that the microbes in the bale have something to feed on to start. So they're going to use that nitrogen, and they're going to use that water, and they're going to start to break down the center of that bale. So you'll actually see that bale go through a heating process, and it is recommended that you use a thermometer to monitor when that heating process has started to decline. Because if you don't go through this process and you were to just throw some seeds and then throw some water onto this bale without adding any minerals or going through the decomposition process, the microbes in the bale, once that water hits them, and once you put those plants in, if you don't do a decomposition process, the microbes are going to be working really hard to break down all of the carbon in the straw bale. And there's going to be no nitrogen for those microbes to feed on, or a very limited amount. And your plants are going to look super yellow, and they're probably going to die. And again, you want to make sure that heating process has passed, or you're essentially going to cook those plants. And then when it's time to plant in that straw bale garden, there are some folks who will, kind of scatter soil on the top and then seed into it and let the plants root in. The image on the right with the tomatoes, they created 3 pockets, filled that with a little bit of soil, and then again, let those plants root in. So you do have at this point a big ball of organic mulch to help with moisture retention. So there are some advantages to straw bale gardening. So if anyone in the audience tries it out, I'd love to see some pictures or some email, feedback on what you've tried and how it's gone. I'll be the first to admit I haven't tried this yet. And I think if I schlep a straw bale up to my balcony, my husband's going to draw the line. So that one might not quite make the Kristine has tried it list. I just want to announce that we've got a couple of videos that are a look back at things we did last year for cut flowers and cover crops. So I want to invite you to check those out if you would like to look back at some field photos. And I really hope you can join us for Garden Discovery Festival on May 21st at McCrory Gardens. And they have announced Tulip Palooza as well, folks. So if you're in the Brookings area, this would be a great time to go check out the tulips before the rain starts to fall later this week. And as promised, we ended up filling the time and then some, John. So I'm going to let you fill out the rest of it.
All right, let's see here. And I think we're good. All right, everyone. Well, I'll pick it up on the woody plants end of it here. And a couple of things. First of all, growing degree days, base 50 for today. We're at 92 at Aberdeen, and that has just this last week has been rather warm for them, relatively speaking, and they've jumped from about 9 a couple of weeks ago to 92. But that's nowhere compared to Sioux Falls and Rapid City that have gained a lot in the last week. Everybody knows what the warm weather has been. So what we're getting is kind of a condensed spring, which is not unusual for South Dakota. We often go from winter to summer within a day or two, but it's amazing how many plants are almost flowering at the same time, where normally they're kind of stretched out over a few weeks. And this is one of them, Cornelian cherry. Now that's blooming in McCrory Gardens right now. It's one of our first woody flowering plants. It flowers as early as the 3rd week of March, and it's flowered as late as the 1st week of May until this year. This is the latest I've ever seen it in bloom. I typically even see a little snow on the ground and this is starting, but it has been so cold, so long, that this is just beginning to flower now. And normally there's a little gap between that and forsythias, and this is a meadowlark forsythia out at McCrory Gardens as well that is in full bloom right now. If you get out there to take a look at all the tulips, you might wander out at the arboretum, and you can't help but see the yellow out there of all the forsythias in flower. And then a tree that's people don't like anymore, it's a little invasive, not so much in South Dakota, is Norway maple. But I will say I like Norway maple because it's one of our few maples that actually has an attractive flower. And right now in Brookings, you go through and you'll see all the Norway maples just covered with these bright yellow flowers that, stand up fairly well during any cold periods. And it's probably one of the few reasons to grow a Norway maple. They're not quite winter hardy, and out east, they become rather invasive. So we got to kind of watch it. All right, well, let's get back to this drought. Yeah, I know we had a lot of snow this winter. Yeah, you're right. I don't know where it went, but it didn't go in the ground because this is out in Corson County. They had snowdrifts still in some of the tree belts. And I got called out to take a look at the little spruce trees here. And you can see the top is just gone. Now, you probably can guess where the snow line was. And the top's just desiccated. But the plants were dry already. You take a look. When you look at a spruce and just all the tips are broken off or discolored like this, particularly if we're getting any redding or purpling, what you're looking at is drought injury. And it might be a little bit of winter desiccation injury as well, typically caused because why? We went into winter fairly dry. In fact, this tree, when I pulled it on the ground, I pulled it out of the ground. That soil was like flour. There was no moisture in it. You know, if I don't care where you live, unless it's in a slough, you might want to make sure your trees get watered. I know you think, well, the snow just melted, but like I said, I don't know where it went. It didn't go in the ground. The root system on this tree was completely dead. Well, let's add to it. For all our West River viewers, particularly those in the Black Hills itself, we're seeing a lot of problems with pine engraver beetle. Now, that population has been building the last couple of years. Why? Because of the drought. And then out there, you add a couple of hailstorms that bust up the trees. And I've been amazed up by bellfish, spearfish, just how much damage there is by pine engravers. Now, the pine engraver beetle spends the winter as an adult, typically in the duff layer in the soil, and then moves out from there. And there's an adult, and unfortunately, I didn't follow Amanda's typical request to put a quarter in your hand. Who carries money anymore? Maybe I should put a credit card in my hand when I'm doing this. But that's the line there is kind of the size of a quarter. And these are very little, but you'll see the adults out now. They start flying when we start getting a little bit of warm weather, which we suddenly have had. And what they're looking for is stressed trees, or even better, recently cut trees that are piled up as slash. It's kind of one of their favorite food sources. But right now, I'm going out looking at pine trees in people's yards even, and you'll see all these little tufts of sawdust there. And that's the adults burrowing in to lay eggs. And if you pull those open, what you'll notice is, I don't know if you can see it, but there's the adult right at kind of the top of the gallery there. And they're just beginning to tunnel in. Pretty soon they're going to lay eggs in there. The eggs will hatch, and the larvae will spend about 30 days feeding within it. And then they'll pupate, and the adults will come out. Now, the importance of that is the second generation. The generation we're going to see in a little bit more than a month from now are the ones that really go after standing live trees. And that's where we're going to see a lot of the damage. But right now, it's been so dry, they're going after standing trees, even on this first generation. You can see all these little pitch tubes. In fact, some are actually hitting spruce. And no, it's not the spruce hips. It's actually the pine engraver hips. It's pretty hungry right now. And even better, if you recently cut some brush and piled it up, you're going to find all these little sawdust piles as they're burrowing in. And there's nothing worse to have right now than a stack of green slash. These are magnets. It's going to pull them all in. They'll lay the eggs will hatch. There's enough nutrition in that the first generation will be able to feed in it quite happily. But when they emerge, the adults aren't going to go back into that. Why? There's no food left. So where are they going to go? The nearest live tree. And we've seen a couple of areas in the hills over the last few years where people have done a lot of trimming and cutting and thinning in late winter, stacked brush, just like you see here, and then wondered by late summer why all the pines surrounding them are dead. What I would say is lop and scatter these. Don't put them in a pile like that where it's going to keep moist and cool. Better yet, if you could get rid of the pile, but I know we have a lot of burn bans right now for good reasons, but try not to do this, or at least I think even scattering at this point would be better than piling up like this, because I found even at this time of year when I scatter the brush, it dries out fairly quick, and quite often that first generation isn't able to complete its life cycle in it. For your valuable standing live trees that are near an infestation, in other words, there's dying trees nearby, pine trees, you may want to consider spraying them, but really you should have sprayed it about 2 weeks ago. Might still be worth doing, but as I say, the adults are beginning to burrow in the tree. And the reason you're spraying the trunk is to kill the adults as they land on it. At about this point, you're just coasting for another year. And what's the best treatment? It's water. Keep your trees healthy. We don't have a problem. During the wet years, back in 2019, for example, if you piled brush in the spring, it didn't really cause a problem in the summer. Why? All the standing trees were very healthy. They could repel any attack. So I know no one's going to go out and water their forest. I get that, nor should they. But if you've got some valuable pines next to your house and there's an infestation near you, this might be a good summer to water. And for those of you that kind of missed the spray window, this is the best pesticide you can get. All right. Water the trees, keep them healthy, and they can prevent a successful attack. Oh man, look at this. And you got to love this. Dry soil there, 2 feet of snow still here. But yep, we saw a lot of snow damage. You know, this is ponderosa pine. The whole windbreak has been split apart. These trees at this point are probably dead trees. They're not really going to be ones that are going to restore very easily, though a little pruning, you might be able to keep some. But I've also noticed in a lot of these windbreaks that are falling apart, they've also been attacked by Zimmerman pine moth. And so if at the broken branches you find these pitch tubes, well, that means the tree was already weakened by Zimmerman pine moth. And that caused the snow laden branches to break much easier. Now, the Zimmerman pine moth is on the tree right now. It's a very, very, very tiny larvae. I mean, you can barely see it. And fairly soon it's going to burrow into the tree. So once again, spraying now. You find these globs of pitch on the trunk near where the branches are attached, quite often in small trees. And I see this a lot in the hills as well as East River. You might want to get out there and get a spray on it that's labeled for Zimmerman pine moth. And there's a lot of products out there that are designed to do that. Voles. Well, you know what? It's too late. They're done, more or less. They've spent the winter chewing on anything they can. And by the way, when you look at the stuff, it's pretty easy to separate voles and rabbits. Voles have much smaller incisors there, so you can see the little cuts that they made. And you're not going to find a lot of those rabbit Cocoa Puffs poop are right around the plants. And anytime you got hiding cover, you can get voles. And with the snow we had, it was excellent hiding cover. So I'm seeing a lot of vole damage, as you can see here in this windbreak and here at the base of the cedars. When I go out and I see cedars that are dying already, I look underneath and the voles have chewed all the way around. Well, what do you do now? Well, sanitation is the key. Don't have wood piles, mow everything close. Get rid of your bird feeders if you're having vole problems right there. You're just feeding the voles. Now, there are baits, traps that can work, and I like those small traps that attract the voles. Once they're in, they can't get out, but the bait is protected from all your critters. I do not recommend just trying to bait the runways. A lot of other things might end up eating that bait, but really the damage has been done by this point. The voles will switch over to feed on a lot of other things fairly quickly. So it's almost revenge treatments now rather than effective treatments. But just remember for next fall, don't provide them any hiding cover. Make sure you've cleaned up your yard. Make sure you don't have a lot of bird feeders near valuable plants. Oh, I got to mention apple maggot, my best apple maggot picture. The reason I'm mentioning this, and Rhoda might be getting questions like this too. I'm getting a lot of calls right now. Well, I'm starting to spray my apple trees. Okay, why? Well, those worms get in them, and it doesn't matter. I seem to spray every spring, and I still get the worms because you don't have the apples yet. Okay, they're not attacking it until you're starting to get the fruit forming. So wait until after bloom for treatments of apple maggot. Right now is a little early. Just put the spray can away. And then a little bit of emerald ash borer update. The pupaes up at the top, they're beginning to develop their eye spots. So I think we're getting fairly close by that, maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks, from seeing the adults. And that adults you're seeing here was a picture I took last year. Maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks from seeing the adults. And then a little bit of emerald ash borer update. The pupaes up at the top, they're beginning to develop their eye spots. So I think we're getting fairly close by that, maybe 3 weeks, 2 weeks, from seeing the adults. And that adults you're seeing here was a picture I took last year. at the beginning of June. So that's what they're going to become here in a few more weeks, and they'll be flying. And they fly about the time black locusts are in bloom, about 500 to 550 growing degree days. For us, that's usually about Memorial Day. So as a reminder to everybody, now is the time to go out and treat your trees, your ash trees, if you like them. If you live in Lincoln, Minnehaha, Turner, or Union County, or there's an infestation within 15 miles of your place or your trees. So if you're out in Rapid, don't worry about it yet. I'm getting a lot of calls from there. If you're in Mitchell, don't worry about it yet. But Lincoln, Minnehaha, Turner, and Union County, where we have confirmed infestations, now is the time to get your trees treated. And the treatments are effective for about 2 years. And so you're going to repeat them every 2 years for about 10 years. And then we can start backing it off. But the treatments are highly effective. I even hate to put this up there. I can't find a better link. But tomorrow from 1 to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, or Daylight Time, excuse me, Daylight Time, we are doing an Emerald Ash Borer Zoom workshop. There is a registration site. You might want to just take a picture of that if you can. That you can go to it and register. If somebody can't find it, just send me an email. I'll send you the link that goes to it. Unfortunately, it wasn't anything I could copy very easily. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing because I know we're getting close to time here. Yeah, about 4 minutes. So I'll turn it back to you, Rhoda, for any last minute details.
All right. Kristine, you did have a question about butterfly weed. Is it emerged yet this spring?
I was looking at that question about butterfly weed, and I was just thinking about passing by our native plant initiative research plots here on campus. Oh gosh, that was last weekend. And I didn't see a lot of their milkweeds emerge. So I would suggest giving it some time. Wait for some heat, wait for those soil temperatures to warm up. I wouldn't call it just yet.
It's
Would
a
you
warm
agree?
season.
I was gonna say, I'm guessing you agree with that one, Rhoda?
I haven't seen mine yet, so
Yeah.
I'm presuming it didn't die over the winter.
So I would say stay patient. And for folks that had more vole lawn questions, I dropped a couple of resources in the chat as well.
Voles can be a problem in our high tunnels. So
Yes, they can. I'm recruiting a friendly barn cat to assist me with our high tunnel at the Southeast Farm. or some good traps. Both are important.
some good bull snakes will do it too.
Yep, for people who are better than me and less afraid of snakes, that'll do it as well.
Kristine, I know that we're ramping up for the garden hotline. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with that?
Yes, we are excited to announce that we've got garden hotline staff back in action and ready to visit with you about your gardening questions. So we'll have staffers working in Rapid City, Pierre, and up in Aberdeen. And if anyone on the call loves answering gardening questions and you're in the Sioux Falls area, we also would love to recruit you to join our team. But for people who want to call in or stop by their regional extension center in Pierre, Rapid City, or Aberdeen, we do have staff ready to help you. Our Pierre staffer is going to start in June, so give her a little bit more time to get there. But send us an email or drop them a phone call and they'll be happy to start discussing gardening questions. And as always, you can find all of the information for how to get a hold of us, our garden hotline, or drop us a quick email type question with photos. You can find all of that on the SDSU extension problems and solutions page. So no, there's lots of ways to get a hold of us. And the great news is we're all getting phone calls and emails, outside of this 1 hour that we spend with all of you. So it seems you're figuring out how to find us, but we sure appreciate you hanging out with us and sending in your questions. Rhoda, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. And with that, I think we wrap up one more evening of Garden Hour. We encourage you to visit us next week at the same time and place. And if you're wanting to look forward to the season, you can go to our recordings from last year if there's something you want to look up. With that, we wish you a good night and a good week.